So in the last couple of days, we have pulled out the winter garden that we are able to grow in Texas for the most part. There are still some plants that are fairly healthy and still producing pretty good food, so we're going to leave those in. As you can see here, we've got some Brussels sprouts and lettuce that are still growing, but we're going to work around those and kind of tear up that soil, get it nice and turned over. We have one more really cold weekend coming. I don't think it's going to freeze, but it'll get nice and cold. So if we just turn that soil over, we have a big problem with roly-polies or pill bugs, and we're trying to get those kind of unearthed so that they get a little too cold and die. And then we're going to come back in with some compost. We created these compost barrels out of the plastic, like food barrels or whatever, that we were able to find for pretty cheap. They were used barrels, and we converted them into these kind of rolling composters that do a pretty good job. We're kind of lazy about rolling them as often as we should, but they do a pretty good job of breaking down our kitchen scraps. So it's a great way for us to just kind of keep food out of the waste stream and just put them in the garden and put it to use later. So you can see there's kind of some eggshells and stuff that hasn't quite broken down, but in the bottom there's some really good rich compost that's been going for about a year. And because we are still using these, you kind of have to pick through and put anything that's not broken down enough back in. And that's what Brad's doing here as he scoops out some of this good old deliciously fertile compost for our garden. We also use this to put lawn clippings from when we mow the yard and leaves. Not too many leaves, nothing. We don't want too much dry material because we do live in Texas and it's really dry, so when our compost gets too dry, we actually have to water it, which is unfortunate, but it does the job, and it's actually really great for the garden. You can kind of tell when you mix it in, and the plants grow way better with some really good fresh compost. And here we are just mixing that in, getting it turned into that soil that we've got there. And this also helps break it up and makes it easier for plants to root and whatnot. When your soil gets too dense, sometimes plants don't do quite as well as when it's nice, kind of loose, airy soil. It's just good to aerate and keep it loose so they grow places, especially with things that are root vegetables like carrots and potatoes and beets and that sort of thing. They like a looser soil. They tend to not grow quite as big when they're in like a very dense clayey soil. And we add compost to this every planting season, so we plant twice in Texas, but and that seems to work for us. But if you just have one planting season, definitely kind of fortify your soil with some good compost and nutrients at the beginning of each growing season. And this is another corner of the bed that we're just pulling out now. These parsnips and carrots have been growing all winter, and actually I think we started them kind of midsummer last year. And it was great. It turned out to be quite a few parsnips and carrots, and they didn't grow quite as big as we had necessarily hoped, but part of that is simply because we have fairly shallow beds here still. We're working on getting them kind of filled up slowly over the years. We'll keep adding compost and they'll fill up. But some of these carrots did turn out pretty decent size. But we do only have about 8 inches of soil depth, so anything bigger than that is either not going to grow or it's going to kind of bend funny at the end, which is also fun to find sometimes.
So now that we have our beds ready to go for the summer season, we can start planning out our beds. This right here is a ridiculous spreadsheet that I put together to help me with companion planting. There are so many differing opinions on the interwebs and conflicting information that I just decided to lay out all my research onto one spreadsheet. I'll put a link or something in the video description below to this spreadsheet if you want to use it. If you don't know, companion planting refers to plants that like to be next to each other, and there's also lots of plants that don't like to be next to each other, whether for nutrient, pest, or water consumption reasons. So on the left side I have a bunch of info about planting, watering, stuff like that. Then on the right we have all of these green boxes and red boxes that match two plants together and tell you whether they are good companions or not. And the letters in the red and green squares correlate to the reason why they are good or bad for each other. So for example, Swiss chard is normally something that you don't want to plant around various herbs like tarragon or summer savory, and also cucumbers and beets for some reason. So this is the reference guide for what the letters stand for: P for pests, N for nutrients, S for space, G for growth, T for taste. You get the point. They're also loosely divided into category of plants. So up top we have the Brassica family plants: kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, stuff like that. Then on to root veggies, peas, peppers, nightshades, and then going into herbs and flowers. So yeah, this is a super helpful spreadsheet when we're just laying stuff out, as you'll see next. What I do is I highlight what we want to plant for the coming season, then copy those items over to this next spreadsheet where we get to lay out our planter beds. So what we've done here is we have one for every season, so summer 2021, winter 2021, and summer 2022, which is what we are on right now. So you can see here that we have 4 beds, 4 beds laid out. Anything in red letters means that we don't have the seed for currently, and we need to get those seeds. Anything in gray means that there's plants already there that will continue growing into next season, so we want to leave those undisturbed. And anything in blue means that we have current plants there that we want to let finish growing or need to take out before we can plant what we want to plant there. So we take this spreadsheet and we match it against the other spreadsheet to make sure that certain fruits and veggies like to be next to each other based on companion planting and what. So yeah, this is a really cool resource, so I want to share it with y'all. Look in the description of the video. I'll put some sort of link, maybe to like a Google Doc or a Google Sheet link or something, so that you can use this resource in your garden. So alongside our regular garden, we have a lot of pots to fill. You might say that Eva has a pot problem, but we like to mix our own potting soil because it's a little bit cheaper when you have to make this much. So we're just taking the dirt from our previous pots and combining that with some compost, some perlite, some sand, and some peat moss. We're not really going off of like a actual recipe or like a ratio. We're just kind of throwing it in there, kind of with what we know. Do some research and figure out what you want to do depending on your climate. Then all we have to do is mix it up and fill our pots. So here is us filling those pots, and there are so many pots to fill. But that's okay because we want to plant a lot of plants in here that have spreading tendencies and that want to spread throughout the garden. So we don't want them planted in the garden. Instead, we want them contained in a pot. So this is a good way to do that.
So now that we have everything pretty well planned out, we're going to start putting some seeds in the ground, which is always an exciting time. I'm just going through here with my fingers and breaking up any big clumps that the rake missed and making sure there's no rocks or anything weird. And then I'm just making some little mounds. I like to plant seeds on top of mounds so they don't get too soggy, just on the flat soil, where this allows the water to kind of puddle in the bottom, and it still keeps the soil moist without kind of over dampening the base of the plant, which can cause rot and damage and whatnot. And for spacing and whatnot, always just check what your seed packets say for depth and spacing. And in our garden, because we do fortify it with compost, it's at this point it's entirely compost in this garden that is just in various stages of breaking down into soil. So it's a fairly fertile mix, and we actually plant the seeds a little closer together than the seeds necessarily recommend, or the packets necessarily recommend, but So far we've had pretty decent luck with that. We had some tomatoes growing a bit too close together last year, and we had to deal with some rot that kind of took out the whole bunch. But other than that, things have done pretty well, being a tiny bit closer than the recommended, at least for us in our garden and our situation. And once we have everything placed, we kind of replace our irrigation system. It's a couple years old. We probably need to replace it because some of the little nozzles are getting kind of blocked up and popping apart at inconvenient times. But right now it just makes things a little bit easier. We have a water timer as well, like just on our hose, which is nice because it kind of automatically waters the plants every morning, so I don't have to get up and do that every morning. I still, when the seeds are fresh and new and little babies, I still come out and water sometime in the afternoon as a secondary water because it is already getting hot enough to dry the soil out very well by the end of the day. So I like to water twice when the plants are little, just to give them a good boost on their way to giving us lots of delicious vegetables. We also made these planter beds a couple years back, just with lumber, and we had originally painted them with a homemade milk paint, because you don't want to use something like pressure treated wood or stains and varnishes that you don't know the chemical contents of, because this is food you're going to be eating. And so we made our own paint, and it worked for about 2 years, but it's pretty well faded and kind of bleached out. But the wood is kind of bleached out and whatnot at this point, and it doesn't super matter. I honestly didn't expect the wood to last this long, and we're only seeing a little bit of rot at the bottom of 1 or 2 of the beds at this point, which I thought was impressive. I was thinking we'd have to replace these every couple of years. But I think they're going to last us 5, maybe 7 years before we have to even think about starting to replace. And since we're only a couple years in, we are starting to just now kind of hone how much of what vegetable we should plant. Last year we ended up with piles and piles and piles of okra, even though we had only planted, I think we had maybe 6 or 7 plants, but they were extremely prolific. And I had to get sort of creative with how to consume all the okra without letting it go bad, because when you plant something and you grow it yourself, it sucks to have it go bad and you have to throw it out. Or I know we recompost it and put it back in the garden, but it still seems like a waste. So here we're just watering the seeds in. This helps keep the soil from blowing away. I like to do this kind of immediately, and this is also why I like to water the plants fairly frequently at the beginning, before they've kind of taken hold and are able to hold the soil down. I've noticed sometimes if you don't water it too much and it gets windy, the top layer of soil and even some of your seeds can just blow away. And the shape of the mounds are going to vary. For squashes and things, I definitely like a nice tall mound. I think here we've got eggplants and okra that Brad is planting in those little mounds in the back of this row. But for things like carrot, which I believe he's planting now in the front, you just kind of scatter it on flat soil. So again, just check with the seed packet and the Farmer's Almanac, or there's a lot of good websites with good information about planting online. I'm not an expert. Go find someone who is to recommend exactly how and when to plant these different things. I think back here we're putting in some squash. And I think we have some melon planned for back here as well. And that's about it. This is how our garden is going so far. Definitely check in and follow for future videos to see how it does and our harvest later this summer. Let us know if you want to see more specific videos or videos on how we handle some pest control later on in the summer. Also, let us know if you want to know more about our composting bins. We could post a video about that. Definitely leave your comments, questions, anything in the comment section below. We love to see y'all interacting with our videos. Share with your friends. As always, like, subscribe, follow for more, and hit that bell. See you next time. Bye!
And fast forward just 1 week and we already have some awesome tiny little sprouts, and soon it will be an awesome huge garden. Yay!